Our next speaker is an original Texavania gangster who has been around since the very early days of the Cluj startup ecosystem. Unfortunately, also he had flight issues, so that's why he got stuck in Estonia. So Adrian Pica is a VP at Bolt, one of the apps that I think all of you in the city here use it. I see the half of the city is full of their scooters and cars with their logos on it. So unfortunately, couldn't make it in person, but he's been very, very active in the startup ecosystem in Cluj, as well as in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in all of Eastern Europe. So he's going to join us virtually, and he's going to share out of his expertise from building products for tens of millions of users, and how can you build products for digital marketplaces. Please give a warm virtual welcome to Adi Pica.
Hey, hi everyone. Hi Philip. Thank you for the intro. Yeah, unfortunately I couldn't be there, but I will join. Unfortunately, what is one of the first in real life events. I get to join it via Zoom, but nonetheless, I miss Cluj. I'm sorry I can't be there, but let's start with the presentation and let's dig into what we want to talk about today. Right, so as Philip mentioned, my name is Adrian Pica. I can't be there in person because one of my flights got canceled. And in a funny twist of events, what happened to me is basically closely related to the topic that I want to cover today. And that topic is economics of digital marketplaces. Not sure if you guys can also see my slides. I started sharing the screen. All right. So first, a bit about myself. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, coming from the brick and mortar world and business area. I also had 2 online startups. One failed, one turned into a small exit. And for the past about 10 years, I worked in product management in the mobility space, and for the past 5, more focused on the mobility marketplaces. I'm currently VP of product at Bolt. Before that, I spent about 1.5 years at Grab in Singapore, similar mobility marketplaces. And before that, I spent a few amazing years at Telenav in Cluj, where I started to work as a product manager, and I learned the ins and outs of product management. I had the pleasure to work with Philip, with Vlad, and a bunch of other awesome folks in the Cluj ecosystem. Now, during my time in digital marketplaces, I had faced a complicated balance of supply and demand in several types of marketplaces, be it ride-hailing, food or package delivery, but also micromobility and short-term rentals of vehicles. And in the process of trying to learn about it, I looked into other types of marketplaces as well as in the economic theory behind it. And why did I do that? My goal as a product manager, but also as a startup founder, was always to try and deliver the biggest impact on the business. So understanding the economics of it is fundamental. And I'm here to try to convince you of that. And in many regards, my presentation will be similar to the one that Josh delivered earlier, not just because we have a similar haircut and a nice beard, but also because we're going to have charts and we're going to have some GIFs and we're going to have a subject that is quite complex on the business side. So who might be interesting, or why might this be useful for people in the audience? And there's a few categories that might be interested. First, product managers. So at Bolt, we are very, very lucky to have some amazing candidates for our product management roles. And we often see very experienced candidates, not just in product management, but also in data, also in operations, that don't have a good enough understanding of the business side of marketplaces. And here at Bolt, we kind of operate in an extreme ownership type of mode, especially in our product management. And sometimes it's very hard to hire people in senior positions just because they do have great experience in product management, but they lack some of the finesse and understanding of the business side of marketplaces. And marketplaces can be quite complex, as you will see. On the other side, I also had a lot of discussions with startup founders in the startup ecosystem in Romania and all over Central and Eastern Europe. And talking to founders that operate some sort of marketplaces, I noticed that sometimes they don't pay enough attention to unit economics or to especially network effects caused by the supply and demand balance and optimal liquidity that you'd expect from an efficient marketplace. So I said some like interesting words: supply, demand, liquidity. So let's get down to what are we going to talk about in the next 20 minutes or so. First, we're gonna discuss what is a marketplace, so we can clarify and get that out of the way. Then we're gonna talk about types of digital marketplaces and how supply and demand behaves differently based on their characteristics. And at the end, we're gonna use some basic economics to see how we can make marketplaces a viable business. That should be fairly easy. So let's just jump straight into it. The marketplace is a place where supply and demand gather to exchange goods or services. And I highlighted a few words here. First, supply and demand. We're going to come back to that. Most of the presentation will be about supply and demand. But first, let's talk about the gather part. Right? So the key here is that you, as an operator of that platform, of the marketplace, you need to gather them in your platform. The fact that the supply and demand in theory exists just because you build it, it doesn't always mean that they will come. In marketplaces, you need to do certain actions to make supply and demand come to your platform, but also to make them stick to your platform. So then if we need to gather them, your question might very well be, okay, so where do we start? Should we get supply or should we get demand in our marketplace? Now, the easiest way to answer this chicken and egg digital problem of what comes first, supply or demand, is, I would say, think about network effects. Think that if you operate the marketplace and you can bring 10% or 20% more of supply or more of demand, which one would have the biggest effect on the marketplace? And also think about which one is the hardest part to convince and get on your marketplace. And the answer to that is usually supply, especially in the early stages of the company. So to make things easier to understand, imagine early days of Amazon. If you would have 10% or 20% more sellers, therefore more variety, you would imagine more products would be sold. Demand would be satisfied much better. Or think of your favorite local food ordering app. If you'd see more restaurants and more variety, you would be more willing to order. Your behavior as demand would be different. And also, like, think as at Bolt, right? Like when you would want to order a car, if we would be able to have more supply, more drivers, which is challenging in this period, we would have lower pickup time and lower prices because there would be less surge and less of those like annoying hikes in price. So these are kind of like some of the characteristics of how you should think about where to start when we talk about supply and demand. But if you operate a marketplace, you need to bring some value. You need to have a value proposition for your supply and demand so that can come and they can also stick to the marketplace. And the stick part is quite important. So usually the way you do it is you need to create an experience that brings some sort of trust and convenience. So in the trust part, you usually will try to fix some asymmetry of information. You can do this with reviews. You usually need to create some sort of assurance. You might need to provide identity verification. On the convenience side, you have things like payments, you have things like marketing, customer support, operations, messaging, and so on. Now, you don't need to have all of them, but you usually need to, cook your own combination of these items depending on the type of marketplace that you are operating on. And in order to cook this special recipe that serves as good value proposition for your supply and demand, then we're going to continue in looking into various types of marketplaces and now how can they affect the supply and demand. And the first one is like business to business, business to consumer, peer to peer, or consumer to consumer. I'll not talk about this anymore because it's pretty self-explanatory. I just put the slide here just to make sure that we don't forget that there might be differences from this aspect. But then when we talk to like really interesting difference, we can talk about global and local marketplaces. So if you think at Upwork as a global marketplace, what does that mean? That means if you add 10 or 20 more jobs in various locations of the world, in terms of the adding more supply, you will definitely have more candidates for those jobs. So the demand will be satisfied no matter where they are geographically. Same for Amazon and a bunch of other marketplaces. Now, if you look at Glovo, for example, or any other food delivery app, what you might see, you will see a lot of local marketplaces. And why I say local, because if you add 10 or 20% more restaurants to Glovo in Cluj, that will only benefit the users in Cluj. So even though Glovo or Bolt Food or Uber Food and so on, they are large companies that operate in more countries, more cities, from a business perspective, that is a local marketplace. And then they operate a chain of local marketplaces. Of course, there's like certain types of economies of scale, but they are essentially very, very local marketplaces. Now, the other interesting difference in marketplaces is open versus curated marketplaces. So if you think of Amazon or Etsy or eBay being an open marketplace, basically as a provider, you just open an account, you sign up, and you can start taking advantage of the marketplace and you can start selling goods and services. Now, obviously, you're going to understand that there might be problems with quality. So if you operate an open marketplace, you might want to have things like a very good AI probably powered fraud detection system. You might want to have good reviews and so on. So you might try to mitigate some of the problems that open marketplaces might have. Now, on the curated side, I'll give the example of Bolt. On the ride-hailing service, obviously, we check all our drivers' documents, we check their driving license, we check the documents of their vehicle. In a lot of markets, there's a lot of other documents that need to be present because of various compliance reasons, background checks, a criminal record, and so on. So from this perspective, Bolt is a really curated marketplace. So if you're an operator of a curated marketplace, you can probably expect higher expenses when it comes to your local operation. There's a lot of work and documents that need to be processed from this perspective. So important difference between open and curated marketplaces. Now, a very interesting type of difference is search versus match type of marketplaces. And you look at Airbnb, right, or Amazon for that matter. You open it and you start searching. And you put different filters and you see a list of properties, and then you open those properties and you try to search for the best potential match for you as an individual based on your needs, your budget, your travel dates, and so on. So these are like search-based marketplaces. But you also have match-based marketplaces. And if you think of that, in Bolt, for example, sure, you choose your pickup, you choose your destination, and you choose the category. But besides that, Bolt dispatch service will match you to the best driver available in that category or a higher category that is willing to accept the ride. And essentially, besides the fact that you get from point A to point B in like generic standard conditions that you're used to when using service like Bolt or Uber, there's going to be very little difference from your perspective. So you will be matched to the best element in the supply. Now, an interesting aspect here is like a food delivery marketplace, which is special because this is a three-sided marketplace, right? Like you have the eater, you have the restaurant, and you have the courier. So the food delivery marketplace is on one side for the food search, it is a search-based marketplace. And on the delivery part, it is a match-based marketplace. That's going to make very little difference for you who is the courier that would be matched to bring the food that you order. Now, closely connected to search and match, we have two very interesting concepts, which are the heterogeneous and homogeneous type of marketplaces. And we're going to stick to the same Airbnb and Bolt comparison. So heterogeneous marketplace is a marketplace where each supply is unique, right? Like your Airbnb apartment, or say you might be looking for your next piano teacher on a marketplace. Those are very unique, and you're going to find something that best suits you, and then you're going to have to pay attention because the variety of offers of supply in the marketplace is quite different. Now, if you have a homogeneous marketplace, which is like the Bolt Food, or as I said, your delivery agent for your Bolt driver or your Bolt Food courier, it makes very little difference for the end user as long as it fits or complies with the generic standards that you would expect. Now, there's a few interesting particularities here because, it's easier to copy a homogeneous marketplace like Uber or Bolt than a heterogeneous one. Like having a supply, very strong supply made of individual items that are not very similar is a great strategic advantage or an important moat. And if you look at homogeneous marketplaces such as Bolt, there's two other interesting characteristics. There's less depth. So if you think of how many filters you can put on Airbnb, you will have way less filters. So you're going to have way less depth of personalizing the type of supply that you would get. And also in homogeneous marketplaces such as Bolt, they will also plateau faster when it comes to the volume. So if you open your app and you're going to see 6 available scooters very close to you, the fact that you would see 6 or 12 would make very little difference in your decision to start and use the service. Whereas if you see 6 or 12 apartments in your search in a particular city, that will cause quite severe behavior on the demand side. So it's important to understand if your market is more on the homogeneous side or more on the heterogeneous side. Now, a few interesting concepts. Size and frequency. I know you're going to say that, hey, this is not specific to marketplaces, but it is specific to marketplaces from some points of view. And it's mostly closely related to the fact that you need to match supply and demand at an expected time, right? So you can imagine that you would be okay to get a match in 24 hours for, a house renovation marketplace, which is low frequency, high transaction size. But you would definitely expect instant confirmation for your cooked food delivery. So if you look at high frequency and transaction size, it's good to understand that they impact customer lifetime value. So if you have high customer lifetime value, you will expect investors to be willing to invest and pay for your acquisition costs. And here, like you also have the high valuation of subscription businesses, not just in marketplaces, but in general, because they are very high multiplicator in valuation. So what that essentially means by multiplicator is that the value of your company will be several times your revenue per year because of the size and frequency. So pay attention to size and frequency of the transactions because they might be fundamental to the way that you will operate the marketplace that you're on. Now we have the concept of multi-homing. That might sound strange to you, but I'm sure you are very well aware of how it works in real life. That is when users are checking more than one app or more than one marketplace before making a decision. So we all know how you open the Bolt app and you open the Uber app, or you open the Airbnb and the Booking app, and you try to get the best offer for your particular needs, whether that's price, that's time, and so on, or other specific characteristics. And approaching the final slides with the characteristic of marketplaces, probably one of the most important characteristics and KPIs is the utilization rate, or it may be called matching rate or time to match. What it usually refers to is basically better usage of idle assets, which is very important at scale. The more you grow, the better your utilization rate, faster your growth will be as a business. But this utilization rate is also extremely important if you have a certain type of very niche or fragmented type of market. So when you talk about the utilization rate, what you're essentially describing is how liquid your marketplace is, or how easy it is for supply and demand to match, right? The more liquid it is, the better the possibilities to match supply and demand, the more business you have. And then the last concept I want to dig into, which is market leakage. Sounds funny, but it's definitely not if you are a marketplace operator. So imagine that you use a marketplace to find, a nanny, a dentist, your barber. Once you have a good match, you have very strong incentives to leave the marketplace. So if you are a marketplace operator or you work for a marketplace company that is prone to market leakage, you need to go back to the trust and convenience slide, and you need to understand what type of value proposition do you need to cook with the offers so that you have the right stickiness and you give value to the users to stay on the market, right? So it can be payments, it can be assurance, it can be a bunch of different things. So these are kind of like the characteristics of types of marketplaces, and understanding the subtle differences means that you will understand how the supply and demand will kind of shift. And in order to talk a bit about the supply and demand, we're going to go back to a bit of basic economics. And I promise I'll try to make this not too much like a university lecture. It will have some charts, but I promise you'll find it interesting. So let's start easy. We have the regular chart that you might be used to. So you're going to have the price on the left that goes up, and then you're going to have the volumes on the lower part, and they will, the more they go to the right, the higher volumes or total amount of goods and services sold. And take an easy example. If you have Black Friday and we have the demand line here, so you can expect that at a high price, you will have very little amounts of goods being sold. And if you have a low price in general, what would happen on a free market? In general, you would expect to see more volumes. So I hope this is very easy to understand and straightforward. Pretty much the same thing on the supply side. So if you think of like taking a very modern and up-to-date topic, if the price of oil increases, just because various oil extractors and producers will have different costs. In some cases, the oil will be closer to the surface, so very cheap to extract. In other places, it's going to be more expensive to extract. So the more the price will go up, the more it's going to make economic sense for companies to extract more expensive oil, right? So you can expect that if the price will go up, the supply will increase. There will just be more and more participants on the supply side offering their goods and services. And this is what the result is, an intersection of supply and demand. And this is the graph that you usually see probably in a lot of presentations. And at the intersection of that, you have what we call the market price or the market equilibrium. Now you're going to say, sure, but this is like a very nice, boring graphic with everything, all the lines meeting at those perfect, unrealistic 90 degrees. And of course, I'm going to say that, money is to be made when something happens to this graph. And unless you are the government to just decide on prices, you can't really move the price, or maybe you can for a while in order to activate network effects. And that's where investors' money comes in. But we're going to talk about this later. But in reality, two things can actually happen there. And one of them are external, and the other one are more internal, related to what you can do. So let's look at the first one, external, which is what we call market forces. So we go back to the same graph, and let's imagine that the supply or the demand, in this case, the supply, would shift from left to right. Now, I'm not going to go into the economic theory with all the distinct forces that can cause this, because we only have 20-something minutes, and I don't want to get too geeky with this, but just a quick example. So imagine that all of a sudden you see a lot of unemployment. So if you operate an on-demand labor marketplace, such as a ride-hailing marketplace, a food delivery marketplace, a home renovation marketplace, what you might expect is a sudden increase in supply. Therefore, and remember what we talked about before, supply is the hardest part to get on your platform. So it's easier if you are in an economic time when you get more access to supply. So when the line shifts over there, that is a new shift in the supply and demand landscape, and the blue box will very likely disappear, and then the yellow box will be the new market that you would be gaining. So think of that market forces in general in the marketplaces that you might be operating. As we said before, we looked at this like perfect 45 degrees angle in supply and demand, which is what we call a unitary elastic supply and demand. I'll not go into the math here, but I'll just say that supply and demand can be more or less elastic, meaning that they will react disproportionately little or much to a change in price and quantity. And let me show you this visually so we all understand what I mean by elastic or inelastic. So let's travel back in time to the time when we didn't have ride-hailing apps, to the time when we didn't have Airbnb. And let's imagine your experience in an airport or in a city during a large conference or event. And then you know exactly how it used to feel. Like the supply will be very inelastic, just like the supply you will see here. So like the angle will be much steeper. And what happens in this type of marketplace? Very little of the demand will be satisfied at a very high price. The rest of the demand will not be satisfied, so they will need to choose something else. Either they go on a bus or get a friend to drive them, or in the case of a hotel, they will sleep at friends or attend the event online. But the point is, where the two lines meet, that's the equilibrium of that particular type of marketplace. It's not the ideal marketplace, but that's where the price will be, just because those are the rules of the market. As I said before, money is to be made when you manage to change or take advantage of changes. So say that you are Bolt or Airbnb, and you add regular drivers with their own cars, or apartment owners that have rooms or full apartments to rent. Like now, the new supply has changed in angle, so it's way more elastic. So as a result of that, you get lower price, you get to increase quality, so the overall revenue is much bigger. And the point is that great marketplaces don't just make a marketplace more efficient, but they also increase the total market. And you might say, hey, Adrian, but like the yellow box doesn't look that much bigger than the blue box. And also your lines, I understand that you're talking about like the demand and supply reacting differently to price and quantity, so being more or less elastic, but those lines look pretty linear. And if you thought of that, I would say that first of all, yes, they should be curves. They should not be lines, because it's how they are in reality. And also, second, if you thought of that, I would really want to talk to you about the job at Bolt, because we need this kind of mindset. In reality, those are not straight lines, but they are curves. So what it means that the elasticity is not linear. So the supply and demand will behave differently on different points of that slope, that curve. So if we want to look at the same business analysis, let's say in the previous case, now when we apply a certain curvature to the supply and demand, you will understand why the yellow part is so much bigger, and what I meant by new marketplaces making the marketplace much bigger than it used to be. This way you understand why Bolt or Airbnb have much higher valuation than the previous way that the marketplaces were set up. Also, extremely important, if you think of this business, what I want to say by this chart is that you either take advantage of market forces that move your supply and demand, or you try to move them. Successful marketplaces usually do both. And that curvature is also extremely important for the future development of your marketplace or for niche type of marketplaces. So you can still expect, and let's keep the ride-hailing examples, you might still expect that there will be a category of demand or users that will expect high quality business rides, a limousine type of service for which they are prepared to pay a much higher price. And on the other side of the demand, you might expect a lot of people that would, no matter how much we would manage to get the price of a Bolt ride as low as we can, you will still have people that would prefer some lower cost means of transportation. And which is why Bolt entered the market of electric scooters and electric bicycles. And of course, there's always opportunity for public transportation, because you will understand that the demand curve will continue to grow, and it will have different elasticity, but also different behavior when it comes to price and quantity. Okay, so as you may imagine, there's like 1-year classes in economics that cover this aspect in complexity. But my goal here was to encourage product managers and company leaders to become nerds about the business side and to better understand the unit economics of the domain that we are all working in. So my message is this: regardless if you are in a marketplace, in a social network, in an e-commerce, software as a service, it's critical for product managers or startup founder to be as fluent in unit economics as they are in data analysis or people management or technology. The best thing that we can do for our companies is to bring focus on what's important and deliver in the biggest possible impact on our business. So if you found today's topic interesting, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, or check out Bolt's career website, because we are still hiring in all our marketplace businesses. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adi. I hope next time you'll manage to join us in person again, but it's great to see you again, my friend.